I came home one morning, and someone had built a fence on my land overnight. What I did next shocked my entire neighborhood. I couldn't believe what I was seeing when I pulled into my driveway that morning. I slowed the car, blinked twice, and leaned forward over the steering wheel just to be sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. There, stretching across the edge of my property like a deep, ugly scar, stood a brand new wooden fence, solid, freshly built, and absolutely not mine. The wood was still bright, the posts perfectly aligned, like it had been put up with confidence and zero hesitation. For a moment, I honestly thought I'd made a wrong turn. I checked the mailbox. I looked at my house number. I glanced at my neighbor's. Yard, no mistake. This was my home. I'd lived here for 8 years. 8 long years of mowing this lawn, fixing the sprinklers, planting trees, and paying property taxes. I knew every inch of this land, every slope, every corner, every boundary. And yet, somehow, overnight, someone had decided to build a fence on my property without so much as a knock on my door. I stepped out of the car, walked closer, and that's when my stomach dropped. Nailed neatly to one of the fence posts was a small white sign, simple, clean, confident, HOA boundary fence, do not remove. I just stood there, reading it again and again, hoping it would somehow change. It didn't. That's when everything clicked. This wasn't a contractor's mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't an accident. The HOA president had done this. The same man who loved, sending warning letters. The same man who fined people for leaving trash cans out past sunset. The same man who walked around the neighborhood like he owned it. He had built this fence himself, or ordered it built, right on my land. I felt my chest tighten as anger slowly bubbled up. Not explosive anger, not yelling anger. The dangerous kind. The quiet kind that settles in and sharpens your focus. I ran my hand along the wood, feeling the smooth surface, the fresh nails, the deliberate placement. This fence wasn't rushed. It was planned. It was intentional. This was a power move. He thought I wouldn't notice. Or worse, he thought I wouldn't fight back. I stood there in silence, listening to the quiet hum of the neighborhood waking up, birds chirping, sprinklers turning on, life going on as if nothing had happened. But for me, everything had just changed. Because the moment that fence went up on my land without my permission, it crossed more than a property line. And standing there in my driveway staring at that sign, I knew one thing for certain. He had no idea what he'd just started. The HOA president who thought he owned everything, our HOA president, Mark, was the kind of guy who loved authority a little too much. He didn't just enjoy being in charge, he needed it. He wore his position. Like armor, like the title alone made him untouchable. Mark had been HOA president for over 10 years, which in our neighborhood felt less like leadership and more like a permanent reign. HOA meetings under him didn't feel like community discussions. They felt like court hearings. He sat at the front table, arms crossed, interrupting people, reminding everyone of the rules, as if they were laws written in stone. Homeowners weren't neighbors to him. They were problems to manage. Everyone knew Mark, and almost everyone avoided him. People would lower their voices when his name came up. Some neighbors paid fines they knew were unfair just to avoid dealing with him. Others stopped attending meetings altogether. Mark thrived on that fear. It kept him in control. So when I walked up to his house to ask about the fence, I wasn't expecting an apology, but I did expect excuses. Maybe he'd blame a contractor. Maybe he'd claim it was temporary. Maybe he'd pretend it was all a misunderstanding. What I got instead was pure arrogance. Mark opened the door with a calm smile, like he'd been waiting for me. Before I could finish my first sentence, he cut me off. The HOA approved it, he said confidently. That strip of land is communal. He said it like it was a fact beyond debate. I took a breath and stayed calm. I told him he was wrong. I explained that I had the original property survey, the deed, and official county records that clearly showed the boundary lines. I even offered to email him copies right there on the spot. He didn't look at me. He didn't ask questions. He didn't care. Instead, he waved his hand dismissively, like he was brushing off a fly. "Take it up with the HOA lawyers," he said. Then he leaned closer and added, "And don't touch the fence." The way he said it wasn't a request, it was a warning. That was the moment everything became crystal clear. Mark wasn't confused. Mark wasn't misinformed. Mark wasn't interested in fixing anything. He believed his position made him right. No matter what the facts said. He thought I'd get intimidated. He thought I'd get tired. He thought I'd eventually back down like everyone else. Standing there on his porch, looking at that confident smile, I realized something important. This situation wasn't about a fence anymore, it was about control, and Mark had made one very serious miscalculation, because while he thought I'd back down, he thought wrong. I tried to do it the right way. At first, he didn't act out of anger. I acted out of patience. As furious as I was seeing that fence on my property, I knew losing my temper wouldn't help. If I wanted this handled properly, I had to be smart, calm, strategic. So I started with the basics. First, I emailed the entire HOA board, not just Mark. I attached copies of my official land survey, the same one I received when I bought the house 8 years ago. Clear boundary, lines, professional measurements, no confusion. I explained the situation politely and asked for the fence to be removed immediately. Then I waited. No response. Not even a, "We'll look into it." A few days later, I sent a certified letter, this time formal, direct, and impossible to ignore. I outlined the property lines again. I included copies of the deed and referenced county records. I requested the fence be removed within a reasonable time frame. I even paid extra for delivery confirmation so no one could claim they never received it. Then I waited again. Days passed. Nothing. Weeks passed. Still nothing. No phone call, no email, no knock on my door. Instead, I received something that made my blood boil. A formal notice from the HOA. It stated that I was not to damage or tamper with HOA property, and warned that any violation could result in fines or legal action. I read it twice to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. They had built a fence on my land, and were now threatening me not to touch it. That was the final straw. Up until that moment, I had given them every opportunity to fix their mistake quietly. I had been respectful, professional, patient, but now they were trying to intimidate me. So I stopped asking. I hired my own lawyer. Within a week, we reviewed every document, my deed, the survey, county property maps, HOA guidelines. My lawyer didn't hesitate. "The fence was illegally built," he said plainly. "It's on your property. You have every legal right to remove it." Hearing that wasn't satisfying. It was clarifying. This wasn't a gray area. It wasn't complicated. It was simple. They were wrong. Armed with that confirmation, I sent one. Final message directly to Mark and the HOA board. Short, clear, direct. Remove the fence from my property within 7 days or I will. No threats. No emotion. Just a deadline. 7 days came and went. Not a single reply. No apology. No compromise. No attempt to fix it. Just silence. And sometimes, silence speaks louder than words. That silence told me everything I needed to know. They didn't think I would act. They believed I would get tired. They assumed I would give up. They expected me to fall in line like everyone else had before. But what they didn't understand was this. I had already tried to do it the right way, and now I was done waiting. On a bright Saturday morning when the neighborhood was calm and ordinary, everything changed. The sun was out. Sprinklers ticked back and forth across freshly cut lawns. Kids rode their bikes up and down the sidewalk. A couple of neighbors were walking their dogs, coffee cups still in hand, and then they heard it, a deep mechanical rumble echoing down the street. Heads turned. Around the corner came a massive yellow bulldozer, moving slowly but confidently down our quiet suburban road. It looked completely out of place between minivans and mailboxes. The ground practically vibrated beneath its weight. People froze. Then, phones came out. The bulldozer rolled forward and stopped directly in front of my house, right next to the fence. The fence. The one that had been sitting on my property like a symbol of arrogance for weeks. I stood there calmly at the edge of my yard, a folder tucked under my arm. Inside were copies of my property survey, the deed, county records, the certified letters, and the final notice that had gone unanswered. The operator leaned out of the cab and looked down at me. "You sure about this?" he asked. There was no judgment in his voice, just caution. I looked at the fence. I looked at the sign that still read, HOA Boundary Fence, Do Not Remove. Then I smiled, very sure. He nodded once, and then the engine roared louder. The sound filled the entire street. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Dogs started barking. The massive blade lowered toward the fence. For a brief second, everything felt suspended in slow motion. Then, crack, the blade pushed forward. Wood splintered instantly. Posts snapped like dry twigs. The perfectly aligned boards that had been built with such confidence shattered under the sheer force of steel and horsepower. Another push. More cracking. The fence didn't stand a chance. It collapsed like it had been made of matchsticks. Panels folded. Nails tore free. Dust and small pieces of wood scattered across the lawn. In less than 10 minutes, what had taken days to build was nothing more than a pile of broken boards. Silence followed. Then shouting. Mark came running down the sidewalk, his face bright red, arms flailing. He looked nothing like the calm, smug HOA president from before. "What do you think you're doing?" he yelled. "I'm calling the police. You'll pay for this. You'll be fined. You'll be sued." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply pulled the paperwork from my folder and handed it to him. Property survey. Legal notice. Proof of delivery, county boundary confirmation. Documents he had ignored. Right on cue, police cars pulled up. Someone must have called them the moment the bulldozer arrived. The officers stepped out and asked what was going on. Mark immediately launched into a dramatic explanation about destruction of HOA property. I said nothing at first. I just handed the officers the same folder. They reviewed the documents carefully. One officer even walked the property line with the survey in hand, checking measurements. After several long minutes, they returned. One of the officers turned to Mark and said, calmly, "This fence was built illegally. It's on his property. He had the right to remove it." The words hung in the air. Mark's mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. For the first time since this started, he had nothing to say. He just stood there staring at the pile of broken wood, his authority crumbling right along with it. And in that moment, everyone watching understood something very clearly. This was never about a fence. It was about standing your ground. The story spread fast. By the time Monday morning rolled around, everyone in the neighborhood knew exactly what had happened. Group chats were buzzing. Neighbors whispered over fences. People who had barely spoken in years suddenly had a common topic. By Monday afternoon, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. By Friday, Mark had stepped down as HOA president. No announcement. No apology. Just a quiet exit. And that's when the truth started coming out. Turns out I wasn't the only one he'd pushed too far. Other homeowners finally spoke up about unfair fines, threats, ignored complaints, and years of intimidation. My situation wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the one that finally exposed everything. Once Mark was gone, things changed quickly. The HOA arranged for the debris to be cleaned up at their expense. Every broken board, every snapped post, gone. No arguments, no paperwork battles. Just accountability. I planted fresh grass where the fence had once stood. Day by day, the lawn filled back in, as if the whole ordeal was slowly being erased. No sign, no boundary marker. Just open space. Exactly how it was always meant to be. And something else changed too. The neighborhood felt different, lighter. People started waving again when they passed each other. Neighbors stopped to talk instead of rushing inside. Smiles replaced the tension that had quietly hung in the air for years. It felt like a community again, not a rule book. And Mark? He kept a low profile after that. No more authority. No more meetings. No more threats. 6 months later, his house went up for sale. He moved out without saying goodbye. Here's the lesson I learned, and the one I hope you remember. Authority doesn't beat facts. Power doesn't beat proof. And bullying only works until someone finally stands their ground. I didn't destroy a fence out of anger or revenge. I destroyed it because it never should have been there in the first place. There's a big difference. Standing up for yourself doesn't make you the villain. Knowing your rights doesn't make you difficult. And refusing to be pushed around doesn't make you wrong. Sometimes doing the right thing means staying calm. Sometimes it means being patient. And sometimes it means standing firm when everyone expects you to back down. Because if you don't protect what's yours, someone else will try to take it. And every once in a while, the only way to make a message clear is to make it unforgettable, even if it takes a bulldozer. If you enjoyed this story and believe standing up for yourself matters, hit the like button. Subscribe for more real-life stories where justice actually wins, and I'll see you in the next one.